Gabriel. Tonight we have Scott Tipping, Magic Box, and Backyard Tire Fire for a while. Dave Nelson with Dick Smith and Hartsfield. Dave Vermont from Dick Smith and his solo Dave Vermont stuff. Steve Warrenfels, who you all know as the owner of Kiss the Sky, and Greg Berner from Cattle Prod and many, many horrible dreams. Anyway, and of course, DJ K-Bass spinning the vinyl tonight.
Yeah, DJ K-Bass.
Tonight, the topic is the British are coming, the British invasion. I'm going to kick it over to these guys. As you can hear, the Beatles, this is the song that kicked off the British invasion,
yes, it is.
As Greg Berner so pointed out. And here we go.
Cool. Yeah, it was December of 1964, and this is up until then, everything had been, the Beatles had released everything in the UK and had not had any American success. So this was the tune that they played in the States, and everybody went crazy, and honestly, the British invasion started from there. The British invasion is really, the time period is really 64 to 66, and there's a list there next to Noah of all the different bands that are kind of part of it. I'll do it really quickly here. The Animals, the Beatles, the Bee Gees, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, Chad and Jeremy, Dave Clark 5, Freddie and the Dreamers, Donovan, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Herman's Hermits, the Hollies, the Honeycombs, the Kinks, Manfred Mann, Moody Blues, Peter and Gordon, Rolling Stones, the Searchers, Spencer Davis Group, Them, the Tremolos, the Trogs, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, the Who, the Yardbirds, and the Zombies. So those are kind of the main crux of it. There's certainly some people in between there. But yeah, the period of 64 to 66, and that is when the British really dominated the charts. And I think there's a reason why they dominated the charts. And that is, if I looked up just kind of to see between sort of 1960 and 63 kind of what was going on with the top hits of the day. You've got to remember that Elvis, who was great, went into the Army. And so he was really not kind of heard from. And Richie Valens and Buddy Holly died in a plane crash, I think around 59, if I'm right. So those were some heavy hitters that were kind of out of the picture. So in 1960, the big hits were, it was Elvis, but it was Elvis doing It's Now or Never, which was not a rock and roll tune. A great song, but not a rock and roll tune. Kathy's Clown by the Everly Brothers, Running Bear by Johnny Preston, and Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters. So, I mean, great songs, but not really rock and roll. 1961 was Tossin' and Turnin' by Bobby Lewis, Runaway with Del Shannon, Blue Moon by the Marcells, Run Around Sue. So again, great songs. 1962 had Green Onions by Booker T, which is a cool thing. Mm-hmm. But also had Sheila by Tommy Rowe and Peppermint Twist by Joey D and the Starlighters. This is just light rock and roll. It's not really the heavy duty stuff. And then 63, right before the Beatles came over, was Sugar Shack by Jimmy Gilmer and the Fireballs, and then Surf City by Jan and Dean, and then He's So Fine by the Chiffons, and It's My Party by Leslie Gore. So a lot of kind of girl groups and girl singers. Great songs, particularly if you go back. They're great tunes. But I think when the Beatles came over with something like this, with the heavy beat and the guitars and all that, it was a much needed remedy to this kind of light rock that we were hearing.
Yeah, I think actually Beatlemania was starting to hit the shores here in the United States in the fall of 1963. In fact, I think there were some specials like Walter Cronkite had broadcast some newscasts on Beatlemania, and then there were some other things that were supposed to happen later on in the fall, but President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, and that kind of put a little bit of a squelch on the media attention that was being afforded Beatlemania in England.
Sure.
And of course, Beatlemania in England was really started in about 1962. I think in 1960, 61, the Beatles were playing Hamburg, Germany, and playing the clubs over there and honing their chops. They released their first single, Love Me Do, in 1962, and it failed to even chart here in the United States or get any attention. But they were building up a lot of steam in Europe, specifically in England, and then in the fall of 1963 they started making a lot of noise, and they came here in February of 1964. I think it was specifically February 9th of 1964. They played the Ed Sullivan Show on a Monday night, and I think something like, I don't know, 60% of the American population was tuned in to that Ed Sullivan Show, and kind of the rest is history.
Did you watch it?
I did. I was 12 years old at the time, and my father was bowling, and I think I told this story the last time, but I did watch it, and I was at a bowling alley with my dad, and I was glued to the TV by the bar, and it was just like, I'm not coming to watch bowling with you anymore, Dad. I'm watching the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show for the next 3 weekends in a row, I think it was, but...
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's just a little footnote, but VJ Records out of Chicago was the first label that accepted the Beatles' first album.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, EMI was I think the parent company in England, and Capitol Records was a sister company here in the United States, and Capitol did not want to have anything to do with the Beatles. And VJ Records, let me backtrack a little bit. We're kind of lucky in that one of the owners of VJ Records happens to live in Aurora, Illinois, on Downer Street, about 5 blocks from where I live in Aurora. And his name is Art Sheridan. And I had the pleasure of sitting down for breakfast with Art about a year ago, and just picking his brain about the whole beginning of VJ Records and the Beatles signing and all that. And how it all turned out is that Art Sheridan and one of his partners were in England at the time that Beatlemania was kind of going crazy, and they were meeting with EMI to do some distribution for him here in the United States. And the word got back that Capitol Records did not want to sign the Beatles, and EMI with VJ said, what do you guys think? You'd like to sign the Beatles? And Art Sheridan and his partner said, heck yeah. And that's a whole story in itself, VJ Records and what happened to them. It's that first record introducing the Beatles is probably the most bootlegged album of all time in the history of rock and roll music.
On to the vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can we spin some VJ Records Beatles?
Yeah, man.
Pick a side, either side is fine with me. I always just thought it was kind of cool that Chicago came through for the Beatles,
Yeah.
you know?
Did for the Stones, too.
Yeah, it's true. Chess Records.
Yeah, actually, Chess Records, a lot of the British, other stuff.
Did you just do what I did?
I don't know, what did you do? Even at first, I was reading about the first Fleetwood Mac stuff, you know, when they were still doing all the blues stuff, Peter Green and that. Recorded a bunch of sides for Chess, and actually recorded with Buddy Guy and Alan Wolf and all those guys.
Exactly. It's kind of interesting.
So was this one of their first singles, or?
Yeah, this was a VJ side from introducing the Beatles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, another single, or you know, the Beatles were kind of unique in that they would release an A-side and a B-side, and sometimes the A-side would become the B-side because the B-side was more popular than the A-side.
Yeah,
And
the Beatles
another,
had no B-sides.
they really did.
Yeah, no B-sides.
And this tune, which is George singing, John and Paul wrote it for him, and the story is that it came from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. There's a musical tune, Listen, Do You Want to Know a Secret? John Lennon thought that that was a sweet sentiment, and that's how they started this tune.
That's cool.
And they also picked a song that he said rather acerbically that was really simple to sing, because at that time George didn't sing much and they wanted something simple melody for him.
It's very cool.
Oddly enough, in the beginning, when the Beatles hit the shores here in February of 1964, and you had that VJ thing and Capitol Records not wanting to have anything to do with the Beatles, there were record labels all around the United States that were kind of trying to latch on to the Beatles and take financial advantage of the whole British invasion. Here's a couple singles, and we're not gonna play them, but this is Swan Records, and this is She Loves You with I Get You on the other side. And this is Tully Records, who I'm sure none of us have really heard of, and this is P.S. I Love You and Love Me Do, got re-released after the Beatles became popular in 1964. So in addition to VJ, there were other ones jumping in on the bandwagon.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think we had a good handful of those off spins there when I was a kid. My sister and brother were probably around Steve's age when this all hit, and I was a little guy, but I was absolutely magnetized to the Beatles, and that night on Sullivan, it was a treat to stay up late as a little kid like that, and see this music that I'd never heard before. It was fantastic. But yeah,
The Beatles tried to get on Apple Records some of those bands too. I remember, speaking of Fleetwood Mac, they tried to sign that early Fleetwood Mac stuff to Apple Records. Wow. But they decided to go with, I believe it was Warner Brothers in the States instead. But the Beatles tried to lure a few of those guys over to Apple.
That's interesting.
Way after their success.
I see you drawing for something.
Well, in the early days of Beatlemania and the British invasion and Ed Sullivan, after the Beatles played Ed Sullivan, it became really cool to have British bands come over and play the Ed Sullivan Show. And over the next 2 years, all these bands like Manfred Mann, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and even the Stones played. And one of my favorite bands of all time, besides the Kinks, are the Dave Clark Five. And the Dave Clark Five played the Ed Sullivan Show more than any other British band in the history of the Ed Sullivan Show. And if you would go ahead all over. What I remember most as a kid in terms of the Beatles and that whole British invasion and that period of music is that there were battles going on at school as to who was better. Was it the Beatles? Was it the Rolling Stones? Was it the Dave Clark Five? And when I was 12 years old, and I was going to school here in Chicago, and it was very much a very strong Beatles versus the Dave Clark Five. You were either one or the other. And I was a Dave Clark Five fan. And so in the end, I guess we kind of lost, but.
I was gonna say, Dave Clark Five was a cuss word in my dad's household, apparently. He was such a staunch Beatles fan that which, being younger, that doesn't make sense to me, why there was rival bands. It's not a gang, I don't understand why that was like that, but.
I always heard that with the Beatles and Stones.
Beatles.
Yeah,
I knew.
Talked about growing up then how it could be one or the other only.
Fierce arguments between the two.
Yeah, it's interesting to me.
Well, wasn't it the good guys, bad guys? The Beatles were, in nice neighborhood jacket shirts, or done up very well, and then the Stones were the bad boys.
Yeah. But the Dave Clark Five were not the bad boys.
No. The knock against the Dave Clark Five was that they were a put-together group. Dave Clark was playing soccer, football in England, and he had a soccer team, a club, and he wanted to raise money for his soccer team, and so he placed ads in the local newspaper and put together this band, and it was all supposed to be about raising money for the football team and just having fun. And at the end of the day, I think the band rivaled the Beatles for about a year or so in terms of the top spot, the most #1 hits on the charts.
That's cool.
Someday you got to watch the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony of the Dave Clark Five. Tom Hanks is the guy who inducted them into the Hall of Fame. And if you've ever seen that movie, That Thing You Do, that is patterned after the Dave Clark Five and the Searchers and this whole kind of British invasion period. And he does a 20-minute long induction that is just, I get goosebumps every time I see that. But at the end of the day, the music was real simple, straightforward, but a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think this term, the British invasion, really applies to the invasion of the pop charts, and completely. I think it's the American rock and roll of the 50s that sort of run its course, like you were saying, and it just at least wasn't happening like it was in the middle and late 50s.
Yeah,
and I think it was a rejuvenation through the pop charts with bands like this.
For sure.
But I think there's another wrinkle in that wave, in that you had bands like the Yardbirds and those kind of bands, the Stones,
Right.
that were steeped in the American blues music
Yeah.
that were coming up too. Of course, they weren't, they had to be manufacture some songs and write some songs so they can hit the pop charts of the United States too.
Yeah, they kind of break it down a little bit. They talk about the kind of the original British invasion, and really what's the specifically the British invasion is the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Herman's Hermits. So kind of pop music with a big beat is what
Right,
they call it.
right.
And then you had kind of more of a rhythm and blues type thing with the Stones and the Trogs and the Animals and that kind of stuff. And then you had
Small Faces.
Small Faces. Then you had kind of a lighter side of things with Petula Clark and Chad and Jeremy.
Dusty Springfield.
Yeah, and where it was more of this
Peter and Gordon.
English kind of imagery, but you had the kind of these lush kind of backgrounds and
Yeah.
stuff. So they kind of separate it like that a little bit.
Can you give
Donovan.
us some R&B Stones right now?
I have, yeah. There's a good example of some R&B. It's interesting. These are, I think, probably some of the first 3 albums released in the United States. Interesting enough, I think this might be one of the first ones. And I don't think there's a Stones song on here that they wrote.
That's what's interesting, or so many bands.
Chuck Berry,
Sure.
How the
Willie Dixon.
the Stones came over here and took America eventually, but but it was all doing the
An
American
actual
songs.
Stones written song?
Right. Yeah, man, give us an early Stones tune.
Yeah, let's see. Something that.
Only got an hour.
All right, here's one. Here's one.
I think it's kind of interesting to note that
This is a great song.
America really did not embrace R&B and blues the way the Europeans did, and especially the British. And it took the British wrapping their arms around our music, the blues and R&B, and kind of making it a little bit like their own, and then throwing it back at us, and then we kind of went, oh yeah, that's cool stuff. But we had it here all the time.
Right.
That's what, reading the Keith Richards biography lately, that they certainly saw the irony when they came over here, because they were itching to get over here and go to Chess Records and see the places that were, so fabled to them in their minds. And they had been just growing up playing and listening to all those songs, and that's how they got their start. Yet, the American kids who were eating up the Stones had no idea who Chester Burnett was,
Sure.
or Muddy Waters, or any of those guys.
Well, and Jerry Wexler said, kids didn't want to see, a 300-pound African American guy, screaming at you. Howlin' Wolf, was a huge man, and stomping around the stage and all that. They didn't want to see that, but put a few pretty boys up there, so to speak, singing these same tunes, and it went over a lot better,
Keith Richards, the poster child.
The poster child for handsome and charming.
At one point in time he was, and then went to hell.
Well, yeah, can you show one of those covers? Because I love the fact that they're considered like these bad boys, and yet
They're in suits and stuff.
Yeah, they're in suits.
Well, there's one of them.
Yeah.
But this is one of my favorite pictures. It's shoved in an alley.
Yeah.
They look like they're about 12 and 13 and 14. But this song here was, one of their early attempts, I think. What's the story? Their manager, what's his name? Andrew Loog, whatever. Threw Mick and Keith in a room and said, write a song or kill each other, something like that. But I like this because it really emulates, it is something that they created, but it emulates a lot of the R&B and the blues influence that they were heavily steeped in. That's why they got together in the first place.
Right.
So, whereas, it was what were the Beatles doing even close, I'll Cry Instead.
Well, and a
Slow
lot
Down,
of the,
Matchbox. Those are Carl Perkins tunes.
right.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, wasn't the Rolling Stones one of their first major hits given to them by Lennon and McCartney?
Be Your Man.
Yeah, it was actually.
I Want to Be Your Man?
Yeah, they talk about this big competition between the two, but it wasn't really with among the bands. They were
Yeah,
friends.
in fact, I think Keith talks in that same book that they actually would pace their albums so that they wouldn't compete with one another. Like if they knew somebody was preparing something, then they could hold off on their record so that it wouldn't flood the market. So yeah, the competition between the two bands was completely fabricated, but it worked.
I think Keith and Lennon were
Because
pals.
You guys were arguing in schools who was better.
We were.
Yeah.
We were. That was, yeah. The Beatles, I think, went on to write, Lennon and McCartney wrote songs for a ton of other artists. Peter and Gordon, specifically, I think. Billy J. Kramer in the Dakotas. And as late as, I think they wrote stuff for Badfinger when Badfinger first came out.
That's true.
So, kind of interesting.
I think the other cool thing that I did some research on this. I admit that the British invasion was not my. It's not really where my heart is. I love the Beatles. Yeah, I know it. I know it. This is shocking. I know, shocking stuff here live. I'm saying it. But I like it very much. I love the Beatles, and I'm a Stones fan and those kind of things like that. But I wasn't a big. I had to really comb through my albums to come up with really just kind of anything. But it was interesting to look and see that they, and doing a little bit more research, they really kind of break down the British invasion to a couple of kind of subgroups. So you've got kind of the British blues with John Mayall and Alexis Corner and all those guys who, if it weren't for those guys, you wouldn't have Clapton and you wouldn't have the Stones and the Yardbirds and those guys who all learned from those guys. And then you got the early British pop and rock like Cliff Richard and Hank Marvin and the Shadows, and those are the guys that the Beatles listened to. And then you've got, this was new to me, this freak beat. And this is the Pretty Things and the Easy Beats, and they were kind of mod and psychedelia kind of
But the Easy Beats were Australian, right?
Yeah, they were. It was one of the guys, Angus Young's brother, I think, is in that. So that was Freak Beat, which I had never heard of. That's kind of garage rock. And then you got Mercy Beat, which is really just the Liverpool guys, the Beatles, Jerry and the Pacemakers, all those guys. And then you've got mod, which is, they said, really more about fashion and lifestyle than it was so much about the music. And a lot of those bands kind of went down. But the Small Faces and the Who are the only ones that really kind of transferred to the U.S. and all that. You've got something on that
Yeah, well,
note?
I think he's got one, and then I can jump back to that.
K-Vaz.
What do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to spin a tune by an early British invasion band that kind of got away from the whole pop and nice type of stuff, or whatever you want to call it, sound. The Kinks introduced a sound that was unlike anything else at the time. If you listen real close to this stuff, it's pretty heavy for its time, for 1964. In fact, in order to create this sound, the folk, as the folklore goes, is Dave Davies, the lead guitar player in the Kinks, took his mother's knitting needles and poked them into this real small green little amp that they had, and perforated the cone and got that real rough, fuzzy sound out of it. And the Kinks are kind of representative of the working class British society at the time, and I think most of the bands that we're talking about were really from working class backgrounds. They weren't well off, and certainly over the years the Kinks have, in my mind, not gotten the respect that they really should have. They're not the well-respected men that they should have.
They were a brilliant band.
Yeah.
Ray Davies is an incredible songwriter.
Yeah.
Great writer.
You know.
I seem to remember when I saw Ray Davies, he was when he went to, it was this tune he played in All Day and All the Night, and he was talking about a label that rejected them, and the letter of rejection said that they didn't want any kind of guitar that sounded like a barking dog. And he was like, man, that is a great sounding barking dog.
Right.
And really, it's a beautiful tone, and it's totally, you're right, it's totally unique. You know, whereas like the Stones kind of emulated blues, the Beatles had this pop thing, and this to me is like proto-punk. You know, it's really raw, it's energetic, you know.
I agree.
And oddly enough, though, Ray Davies will tell you that He was trying to write a blues song a la Big Bill Broonzy. This song really started off very, very slow, piano-based. Wrote it in the living room of his parents. What'd they call it, a two-flat or whatever, but it started off as a blues song, and this is what it
Yeah, a lot of them have said
sounding
that.
like.
The Beatles will say, "Oh, this is kind of us trying to write a blues," and when you listen to it, it's nothing like a blues as far as what we know as a blues structure. But a lot of them said that was just their version of it. However, they kind of assimilated it and
On
ended
the
up
back
coming up with something else.
At the back of King Size, it has the statistics of all the guys in the band, and their parents' names, their brothers and sisters, their favorite foods and drinks, and all this stuff. But it has your biggest influences, and Big Bill Broonzy's right under Ray's, right there.
There you go.
Well, can we move to side 2? Because here's another thing that I'd like to give Ray credit for, since we're doing that. Side 2, track 6. One of the things I thought was fascinating about Ray Davies was that he realized that they couldn't just emulate blues forever. And one of the things I think he was on the start with British bands that a lot of people embraced later that he didn't get the credit for, like people like Pete Townsend or later Steve Winwood, was getting back to English roots. And even later Zeppelin, when they started doing like Celtic kind of folk things and stuff like that, a lot of that stemmed from the fact that Ray Davies knew we can't just emulate American blues. We have to go somewhere else with it. And I think that this example, for me, it kind of separates when they went from being this, kind of punk band to like they sound very British to me here, and beautiful.
Well, just our first half hour is winding down, so this will be the last song. We're going to take a short little break after this, and then we'll come back and listen to more stuff.
That's a fast half hour.
Yeah.
Wow. Fast. I had a lot more to say.
Felt like 32 minutes to me.
If you take a look at that,
That's yours?
wow.
Yeah. You got
If you take
unplugged?
a little sign over there where we have the list of the British Invasion bands, I put that together in a certain order for a reason. And I grouped some together for a reason. My very first concert ever was 1965. I was 13 years old. And I went to see the Kinks, and they were playing with the Searchers, Freddie and the Dreamers, and Cilla Black. And my best friend, Bob Cohentius, his mother worked for the American Consulate. We were living in Frankfurt, Germany at the time, and they got us backstage passes, press passes, to go backstage and interview the bands. And it's funny that you bring that album up, because those are the kind of questions that we asked. What's your favorite color? What kind of car do you drive? And what kind of girls do you like?
Favorite drink?
Favorite drink? Well,
Newcastle Brown.
Yeah.
Ray likes.
Nice.
Sterilized milk.
but that's why I got hooked.
Really?
It's Dave Davies.
Dave Davies. He's underage.
Oh, yeah.
Check out his age.
What in the world is that?
Yeah.
That was the timer.
His eggs are done.
Okay, we'll finish listening to this song and
Our eggs are cooked.
Taste in music lousy, man.
Can we dance around at any
Interesting
point?
stuff.
yeah, by all means.
You're right, Scott. Ray was the one that first kind of started writing songs about British society and the working class Brit and
Political stuff, too.
yeah, very political stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of viewed it, and this is just my own little narrow window, but whereas like Lennon and McCartney started expounding and storytelling and also being very introverted, Ray's stuff was way more societal. Later, Lennon was very different. He got very political and stuff
Yeah,
like that,
for
but
sure.
but early on, a lot of that came from Ray, you know. And I really like a tune like this. What I really love is hearing those first early singles. I can hear the American influence on those songs, but I don't really hear an American influence here. This sounds very British to me right now.
Do you remember when you first heard them, Steve?
Yeah, it was actually 65, early 65 is when I first became aware of them. Again, I was listening to the Dave Clark 5 and
So radio?
yeah, through radio.
What did they? What
Armed
was the-
Forces Network, actually.
What did they start playing first? What song?
They played You Really Got Me, followed by All Day and All the Night, and Tired of Waiting, and Set Me Free, and
I remember Tired of Waiting.
Till the End of the Day, and
All the big hits.
yeah, the power chord type stuff, and then of course A Well-Respected Man and Sunny Afternoon and Waterloo Sunset came after that, and then the Kinks got banned from the United States for 3 years. They were not allowed to play in the United States because they refused to sign musician union contracts, and they were banned from 1966 to 1969. And I was fortunate enough to see them when they came back in 1969. They opened for The Who at the Kinetic Playground in Chicago, whereas in 1966, The Who were opening for the Kinks. And it was kind of role reversal.
Well, we'll pick up there when we return.
Yes.
All right. We are going to return to the second half of British Empire.
Yeah.
Well done, Noah.
Have we returned?
And we're back.
Are we really?
It's a professional show here.
I'm very professional.
Okay.
Creepy.
I am professionally creepy.
Are you trying to look British?
That's funny.
Yeah, I just pick up from the Kinks segue here, and I was
Billy
curious.
Crudup.
I was curious if you knew this, Steve. That now, of course, Rod Stewart has become a name of evil and badness.
Yeah.
But he has his place in that he. You know, I mean, I was, of course, during the British invasion, has worked with the Jeff Beck group, and then later the Faces.
Right.
Before that, he actually, pre-Kinks, sang, was the lead singer of the Ray Davies Quartet.
Whoa.
And
Wow.
and him and Ray,
Wow.
him and Ray did not get along together very well, and there was a power struggle, and so it didn't last too long. But that was the deal. And then he actually, Rod also, then he became, he had a band with Peter Green and Mick Fleetwood. Before he started playing with Jeff Beck. Wow. And then in '69, when he stopped playing with Jeff Beck, he started the solo career, which is, this song is from actually this a little later album, 1970. Every Picture Tells a Story. Sorry, I forgot to.
Yeah.
But once again, I thought it interesting that a lot of these records that I was digging through the archives, like this one, and I chose this song because, again, it's an American songwriter, you know, Arthur Crudup, as you pointed out, and it's kind of interesting. So yeah, that's the Kinks
Wow.
This-
Rod connection.
Yeah.
That's
This
very
particular
cool. Very
record
cool.
is, for me, just sent me this one. I absolutely love this record.
Yeah.
That was
Before Rod was his mind was taken over by aliens.
the band.
Sexy
The band
Legs,
is just
yeah.
really fantastic. The musicians on this, the span on the styles of music on it. That Fooling You or Losing You is just incredible.
Yeah, those folks that are into Mumford and Sons, today's Mumford and Sons, ought to go back and check out the early Rod Stewart albums, Gasoline Alley, and Every Picture Tells a Story. And some of the artists that are on those albums were from a Irish folk band called Lindisfarne, who I think Mumford and Sons owes a lot of debt to.
Yeah, I agree that.
Yeah, or should take a couple more lessons from.
Yeah. Well, here, let's start to hand that back, because if we're going to talk Rod Stewart, we're going to listen to Ichiku.
We'll go backwards just a little bit.
Yeah, we're going to go backwards. We can do that here, right?
Oh yeah.
We can't.
Yeah, we're going all over.
Ichiku Park. Well, we're going to listen to, I think one of the things that really, Jeff Beck group you mentioned in Faces, but the Faces stemmed from the Small Faces, which was Ronnie Lane and Steve Marriott. And then Steve Marriott left and they reconfigured the group with Rod and Ronnie Wood. So I want to go back, take the Wayback Machine to a little more psychedelic Small Faces.
I remember when this came out on the radio, Itchycoo Park. It was like nothing you ever heard. That drum. What do you call that? I don't know, phasing.
Yeah.
Something. There was a technique used.
Well, there's a sound effect that we'll hear that is. It is phasing the tape, or some people call it flange, where what they actually did was have two tape machines running at the same time, and somebody would just slightly slow the other tape, and then the tapes would kind of fall out of phase and create the effect. And we'll hear it at the end of the side.
It gives it a larger sound.
Yeah.
Or a wet sound, actually.
It's like the start of the kind of psychedelic recording techniques. This is one of my favorite tunes.
So that's Marriott singing.
Yes. And what I like is he's very cute and British here, but you can hear some rock and roll in his voice.
What you'll hear.
Now, this may be a stupid question, but
No stupid questions.
well, Robin Trower, did he get Bridge of Sighs from this song? Or was that just like a universal, like British thing?
That's probably
Bridge
a
of
stupid
Sighs.
question.
Okay, there's one stupid question. No, I don't know.
You're allowed 3.
I've got 2 more.
There's the phase.
To the phasing, yeah.
Not just the guitars, everything.
Right. And back in those days, I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating recording today and stuff is we now have technology that creates something that'll create phasing.
Oh, yeah.
We can plug it into something in the computer and it does it. And back in the day, everything was handmade. People had to create phasing with tapes.
They experimented.
I mean, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yes.
I mean, what they did on that
yeah.
was amazing. That whole
The
clock
synthesizers.
chime thing was
Right.
just this 15-foot piece of tape
Right.
of all these splices of these different clocks, and what they had to go through to do it.
It's better that way.
It is.
When you had less to work with, you had to think more. You know how to make
Limitations
this work.
can create endless music, I think. And one of the things I really admire about early mixing, nowadays we can put things in a computer and we can program it. This should come up a little bit louder here. This should come down a little bit here. And you type it in and it does it for you and you print a mix. But back in the day, I remember David Gilmour from Pink Floyd saying that a mix was just as much of a performance as the performance, because a bunch of people would be at the board and have to raise this at a certain time and take this down, or I got to slow up this tape, but I can't slow it up too much, and they were working, you know. And it did sound better. And I believe you have a segue with Mr. Marriott.
Well, yeah, the Small Faces. Actually, this band, Humble Pie, formed out of a number of great British bands. The bass player was from Spooky Tooth. Marriott was from Small Faces, and an 18-year-old phenomenal guitar player by the name of Peter Frampton from The Herd. And this Rolling Stone called this record came out in 1969, I believe. The band was formed. It's called As Safe as Yesterday Is. And Rolling Stone called it, actually termed it a heavy metal record. And I'm going to play a song called Bang, ? The Steve Marriott song, First Cut.
This is for Amy Perry. Amy Perry is a big Humble Pie fan.
Good,
Small
because this
Faces.
is, I've forgotten, I had not listened to this in a long, long time, and I listened to all 4 sides. This great compilation here came out in '73, and it's called Lost and Found. It has the very first 2 records, As Safe as Yesterday Is and Town and Country. Town and Country being a little bit more of a acoustic-oriented one, but that was a great find, being a young man and buying that in 1973. But this is, come on. You know, this is just great rock and roll, and really is pushing the edge here, you know, to that, you know, heavy metal sort of edge almost, but Steve Marriott, I think, was one of the best rock and roll singers ever. I mean, him and Rod really had a lot of that sort of thing in their voices. You know, they're kind of similar, but just great rock and roll voice.
Steve and I will argue with you that Paul Rodgers is our favorite.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I can't.
He's right
I
up there
can't-
with
Yeah, he's up there.
I won't argue too much, but they're all great.
Sure.
Yeah, they're all
But I know
great.
they have that grit.
The other thing is, I forgot what a great player Peter Frampton was.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At 18 years old, this kid was phenomenal. So, but this is just great stuff.
Well, I think what's interesting when we go back to Marriott and we go back to this kind of idea of sitting around and listening to records, Steve Marriott is no longer, or maybe never really was, a household name, and I don't understand why.
No.
Nope.
Robert Plant is, and I love Robert Plant, and I'm a Led Zeppelin fan, but these guys were fantastic. Small Faces was an amazing band that released some amazing music, and it's not, I think, I don't remember the percentage, but there was an NPR thing with this guy who had the largest record collection, and he said something, and I'm kind of paraphrasing that, between 1947 and 72 or whatever, only 22% of that music was released on compact disc. And I know later they came out with Humble Pie stuff reissue and Small Faces, there's an anthology, but there's a lot of great music that has gone swept under the rug, and a lot of people that should get their due that don't get their due simply because
They never converted the information.
yeah, they never converted the information, or, you know, like classic rock radio took a couple of staples and said, this is what we play.
Sure.
And they forgot about a lot of great music of the time. And that,
I agree.
that is a reason why people should go back and explore, because you start to open up things that you go, how the hell did I not know about this? Like Steve Marriott's voice has changed the way I thought about music. And you know, I discovered him in a 50 Cent bin getting Rockin' Live at the Fillmore by Humble Pie. you know?
Absolute great one too.
Yeah.
Great live stuff. Eat It was another great
Yes.
double record set, but I just, you know, I always think 1969. This is, you know, this is as good as any
Yeah.
good rock stuff I hear now, or any of the Zeppelin stuff that was happening after this. Just a lot of really cool stuff going on.
Speaking of the Zeppelin stuff in '69, it's earlier today digging through the stuff, and of course all the old Zeppelin records, which for me is part of the British invasion, whether it is or not technically. But I remembered those first couple Zeppelin records when I got them, and how they changed me as a kid.
Yeah.
And Led Zeppelin 2, I had the little phonograph, and I was rolling my newspapers for my paper route. And I learned, you guys were talking about recording
rolling
tech.
papers.
Yeah.
Rolling
The
newspaper.
rolling papers.
That's cute.
Early. And so, but I had that record on as I listened to it hundreds and hundreds of times. And I learned a lesson about, you were talking about the you know, the recording techniques and things of the day. And that classic solo on Whole Lotta Love is hard panned to one side.
Yes.
And so that solo
Does a lot
came
of
on,
this.
and I was ready to kind of rock out as I usually would with a rolled up newspaper. And the solo was missing. And I thought, did I play it so many times that I've erased it somehow off the record? And I learned an important lesson about stereo recording at their as one speaker had gone out, apparently, that I did not know.
Oh, great. That was actually kind of a good thing if you didn't have a good stereo. Of course, you're going to lose something. But a lot of times, if you needed to separate out a guitar part when you're learning it off
Yeah,
those
that's
records,
right. That's true.
You'd hard pan it left or right just to hear that one guitar.
Yeah.
I know, like with some of the, even with the Allman Brothers recordings, you could do that. I know I did it with a lot of the Hartsfield recordings.
Someone say Allman Brothers?
Yeah.
I don't think they fit in.
Britain? Yes.
Although
Britain,
Dwayne
Georgia.
did play with a fellow named Eric Clapton.
Yes.
Yes, he did. That's a lovely segue. I'm playing, I hope I guessed this right. Did Jimmy Page not play on Hurdy-Gurdy Man? Did he play on Hurdy-Gurdy Man?
He did.
Yes, he did.
Okay, good. I took a stab there, so I did a little segue there.
As did John Bonham.
Oh, really?
And I think John Paul Jones as well.
That's John
Those
Paul
three,
Jones.
yeah.
Tipping, do you concur with all that information?
I know about John Paul Jones. I did not know John Bonham. That doesn't mean. That doesn't
Just
mean.
listen to the plod
Yeah.
of the bass drum.
Sounds like Ollie Olson from Uriah Heep to me. No idea.
You know, there's something about 60s music. I was just reading an artist that about an artist that I really like, that's a modern New York artist, and I was furious, and you know, God bless the people that live in my household that have to take it when I read a music article that says something bad about Jimmy Page, because it's like 48 hours of ugliness in the house. But they were bashing Rolling Stone music publication for saying that 1964 to 1975 was really where it's at, and there's a lot going on now that's worth listening to. And I agree that there's a lot going on that's listened to, but one of the things I was talking to my wife about is that there's a certain period of time in rock and roll, and you can look at it in the 50s too, with like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and all this stuff. But what we're listening to here, this British invasion stuff, there was a period of time that was like a renaissance, where there was a creative explosion that does need to be looked at again and again, because it's historic as to what it did, and it was such a prolific period of time. We're going through. Everybody's been saying on break and stuff that we don't have enough time to cover what's here, and that's because there was a trove of just great music and really creative recordings. Again, we're talking about mixing and stuff. If you listen to the mix of this, and like the tremolo on Donovan's voice and this kind of fuzzed out guitar, there was so much creativity. And from somebody who gets to work with technology now, I'm amazed at going back and seeing what these people did with such little things, and yet now everybody has everything at their disposal, and yet the creativity and the spark a lot of times is missing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you listen to Sgt. Pepper or something.
Well, and then from
blow your mind.
Exactly,
Right.
and then from then on, for the next, almost 10 years, you had bands like, I got ELP here, I've got
Right.
Pink Floyd, Yes,
The very early
Gentle
Genesis
Giant.
stuff.
The early Genesis was really, really great, progressive, innovative music. It was something you hadn't really heard before.
Alan Parsons engineering.
Yeah,
A lot of that stuff.
amazing and very creative things.
Right.
Status Quo, remember that band? Pictures of Matchstick
Matchstick
Men
Man, yeah.
was very sort of psychedelic song.
Top side. I want to go back. I keep going backwards. What is it?
It's all right.
It must have been something I
Must have
drank.
forgot those.
Put on some Blind Willie McDowell.
Yeah.
Next, yeah.
I want to go back because one person that is a household name and has had success as a solo artist, but started in the mid '60s with the Spencer Davis Group is Steve Winwood.
Sure.
And I don't know. I just love this track, and I'm being selfish and want to listen to it.
Think about this guy being 15 years old.
That's right.
And singing R&B like people thought that he was from the south side of Chicago.
Right.
Yeah, they said he could nail Ray Charles.
Yeah. 15 years old.
The other guy like that was Richard.
Chicago covered
It's
this,
a
right?
year
Chicago
younger
covered
than your
this.
son.
Chicago did cover this.
Yeah.
When did this come out?
This came out in early '67. Spencer Davis Group had a couple of singles that flopped, and then they released, I don't remember, I think Give Me Some Lovin' came first and then this, and they were both hits, and then Steve Winwood thought, why do I want to play under this guy's name when I'm the one singing the tunes, you know?
Right. Sure.
Yeah, he wasn't. It didn't last long. He was
No.
because Traffic formed in '67, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
And that original Traffic lineup, which morphed through the years back and
Yeah.
forth, but with Winwood, Dave Mason, Capaldi, and Chris Wood, that was some of my favorite
Yeah.
British invasions.
Fantastic.
Oh, that was
Those
great
early
stuff.
Traffic
The
records.
early Traffic were great.
And so the story
Spark.
goes, he went to see Cream, right? As a fan, he went to see the band Cream in
Steve Winwood.
1968 and wanted to form a band with that guy, Eric
Yeah.
Clapton.
And they did.
And they did. Which
A couple years later.
how old?
He's like 15 or 16, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds
At
amazing.
this time, yeah, he was 15, 16. I think even when he played in Blind Faith, I don't think he was but 20 years old, something like that,
Yeah.
19, 20, 21-ish.
Wow.
I just saw, and I see where you're going, and I applaud you. I just saw that this documentary, which I highly recommend if you have the same disease that all of us do, called Beware of Mr. Baker, which is a documentary about Ginger Baker, who was the drummer for Cream and then later Blind Faith. And Steve Winwood is talking about Blind Faith in there, and he said that him and Eric met, I believe, at Steve Winwood's house, and they were teaming to make this great band. And Ginger showed up and said, "I can't wait to play." And what Winwood learned later was that Clapton was mortified and scared of him and wanted nothing to do with him, but had to have him because he didn't want to get hurt. And that was why Blind Faith was so short-lived.
Yeah,
him
it
with a
was
cane.
right after Cream. I mean, Clapton said the arguments were just incredible, just all this fighting, and then as soon as he gets out of that, then Ginger
Do
Baker's
the
right
back
back.
cover of this, right?
Only the back cover, yeah.
Isn't that terrible?
It's disgusting.
Let's go with number 3.
Ginger's daughter, I think.
That's what someone said, that that's Ginger Baker's daughter.
It's his daughter.
There's a naked picture on the back here that you guys can't
You
see.
could say it's a teenage boy that's had too much soda or something.
Yeah.
Too much soda?
You could say that.
Yeah.
Well, after Traffic, he put out a couple records, and Winwood dropped out, and then I think Winwood then they did the Blind Faith record, just a one-off with Clapton, and then Traffic got back together. Although he didn't call it Traffic, I think him and Capaldi and Wood started recording again, and then under a different name, and then it ended up being the
John Barleycorn.
John Barleycorn record.
Yeah.
Yes, and then Mason came back in the fold, and they did some more Traffic stuff. And
You know, the thing we keep hearing is that, so you played the Rod Stewart tune,
Right.
and that was an
I
Elvis
picked
Presley,
this too.
it was
So
an Elvis
it's a-
Presley
it's a
song.
Buddy Holly song.
It's a Buddy Holly song. So all these
Yeah.
British guys are always mining the American music,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So it's
kinda
interesting.
Stuck on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a Buddy Holly tune, one of his last ones, I think. Do you remember where the bass player came from this band? Rick
Family.
Crash. Family. There you
Family,
go.
yeah.
Which I know nothing about. What do you know about them?
I've got 3 of their albums, and they were kind of what I would call a progressive British band and experimental a little bit.
Interesting.
He ended up joining Traffic then too after this.
He did, yeah.
What did Clapton do after this? Anything at all after this album?
He
Currently
Floundered in obscurity for the
Terrible,
next 20 years.
terrible album. Yeah.
Disney movies, I believe.
Who did he hook
Hooked up with Phil Collins, and he did a
Yeah.
Yeah, that
lion
was
movie or something like that.
awful stuff.
Vicious lies.
And then it got ugly.
But this is when Clapton then, because they were Delaney and Bonnie were opening up for Blind Faith, weren't they?
Yep.
That's when he
Yes.
joined Delaney and Bonnie because he was
Yep.
a lot more fun than playing with these guys.
Yeah.
And then he stole Delaney and Bonnie's band
Band.
and formed Derek and the Dominoes.
Exactly.
He was on the Johnny Cash show about that time too.
There you go.
So it's
Yeah.
One of the most interesting Johnny Cash shows I've ever seen.
Right.
One of the things that should be noted, though, like that Clapton had mentioned, and something that we don't have to, most modern national big touring people don't have to deal with, is that when Cream became popular, and then later when Blind Faith started, and a lot of these big bands, there was really no protection for the artists. Their touring schedules were horrendous. They would just run these people ragged. If you look at a lot of their schedules and like the travel arrangements that they had to do, and it was horrible times. So not only did he not like the arguing of Blind Faith, but I think there was something to be said where when he was playing with a smaller band and they were booking realistic shows at smaller venues, and he wasn't dealing with people that were throwing stuff on the stage and all the kind of madness that came with that time period where things weren't organized, you know, and people would get sick and there was no cancellations. You would just have to go out there. And I think that was something that dissolved, you know, because Blind Faith was known because of the collaboration of Clapton and Winwood as a supergroup. And when people saw dollars, they just shoved them out on the road and wanted them to work. And
probably pumped them full of amphetamines too, as they're, going down the road. I'm reading about the band, but
Right.
the English tour Dylan was doing, and Grossman was just, he was just fueled by amphetamines the schedule was absolutely grueling.
Yeah. Yeah, it turns
Physically
out
just
that
can't take it.
people need to sleep.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what killed Hendrix.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
People need to
Freaked out because he'd been on like an endless tour and he got
Right.
3 days off. He told his girlfriend he wanted to sleep.
Right.
Took a bunch of sleeping pills and he never woke up.
Right. Well, and a lot of people at that period of time had topped themselves with either uppers or downers and alcohol, and
Yeah.
he was one of those casualties. And I think it was because those people weren't resting.
Yeah.
But not this group. We're rested.
Yeah.
You know what I would like to hear is that you played the other day at that gig was the Animals, the song
Oh, yeah.
that seemed to be lifted.
All right.
Cheating.
Well,
Yeah.
we are winding down.
Oh, okay.
We've got about 10 minutes left. So
Okay.
by all means, if there's anything that anyone feels must be heard,
Well,
Now's the time.
since
No,
it's a
I'd like to
request.
hear this. This is an interesting thing, I thought.
Shame on you.
I know. Shame on Ginger. I didn't realize it.
leave it to Ramon.
I don't know. She kind of looks like the lead singer of Blue Cheer. I'm
Yeah.
going. Okay, so track 4. Give me a second before you start it. So the Animals we talked a little bit about, fronted by Eric Burdon. There's a footnote. The bass player Chaz Chandler discovered. Not like he dug in the dirt and found him there, but he was in a club and saw Jimi Hendrix play, and he became a manager and helped Jimmy start. But Eric Burdon was the singer here, and I love these old sides of the Animals, and I had read about how this one Tom Petty song, that's one of my favorite Tom Petty songs, Breakdown, was actually taken from an Animals tune. And I went out and got this album, and when I heard this song, the verse of this song, I called a bunch of my friends and made them listen to my stereo because I couldn't believe it. And you have an email? Should we take a break? Hang on, she's got to get this. Yeah, okay.
Which is funny, Scott. When I was a kid and we were listening to transistor radios at the time, we would do that. We would call friends up on the radio and take the transistor radio and put it right next to the phone. You gotta hear this.
Well, and again, these two chords are very similar to Breakdown, but it's not really Breakdown. But wait till the verse hits, and
Sure it is.
If
You
you
can-
guys,
you can hear it.
Yeah,
You can
and
hear
if
it.
you
Wait,
remember
just wait.
Breakdown,
Yeah, just wait.
here you go.
Absolutely.
And here's the. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's the song.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the only one.
Yeah, he's the only one that's ever stolen anything.
We were talking about, just the blues, the old blues thing about who stole and copied and
man.
stole and copied.
Even Steve's story about the pencil in the speaker or whatever. I mean, that's that goes back to Link Ray and
Sure.
one of the early guys from Junior Blue Flames or whatever that the early Sun Sessions band was. I
Yeah.
forgot who it was. I mean, everybody's got that story of this is how we got distortion, and we so even that story is just like borrowed, begged, and stolen all the way down the line.
It's all been done before.
Yep.
All been done.
Do you want to play some of that Dick Smith?
Initial thrust.
The true British.
I think you got.
Should we go out with that?
Yeah, I think you got the closer right there, my friend.
Is there something that all of you would like us to play, maybe, that we might have in our collection up here? Some chestnut from the British invasion period, or
Yeah, you
a
got it.
band that we haven't?
I think Dave's settled on what he wants to play, regardless of.
No,
what the-
after Dave.
Oh, after that.
After Dave.
After Dave.
Can you
play the last
rare
cut
chestnut from the
on this?
60s? Yeah.
This is, I believe, from '64.
Oh, going back.
This is the, I believe this is the Thamesmen.
Currently residing on the now file.
I think this is,
Give me your money. Is this Give Me Your Money?
No.
What's that one?
this is a little bit more
A little more psychedelic.
more later 60s.
Well, we were talking about like Ray Davies getting connected with his British roots and stuff, and being a little more English, and I think that this song fits perfectly. Did you break the turntable?
It's
There we go.
Cups and cans.
You can put that record cover.
That one you can.
of course we're joshing here, but I think it's probably the parody and the epitome of how we've embraced the British invasion so well. And Martin DeBurgy documented it all for us with Smell the Glove, the collected works of Spinal Tap.
It always makes me think of the Walk Hard movie with Dewey Cox. And he does the Dylan thing, and he's just sputtering complete nonsense, and it sounds very much like anything Dylan would have come up with. It's really fun.
I think it's funny just how well they parodied the songs.
These guys are great.
You know that.
I like that. The other one, the little Yardbirds kind of thing. Give me your money or whatever it's called, something like that. I love that one too.
But all the way down to the Penny Lane piccolo trumpet. So.
There's their credibility.
Yep.
It's a mockery now.
This just makes me think of anyone for tennis. The Cream song.
Terrible Cream song, yeah. Terrible.
No, I love it. I stand by that one. When I was a little kid, my parents gave me the Best of Cream on vinyl, and I listened to that again.
Anyone for tennis.
Yeah,
I like that one.
I was still. In fact,
But that was the one
we're
song.
going overtime because I want to settle this score with you people.
Are you playing it?
No, I'm not playing that one, but I want an outside opinion because this is one in my house. After a lot of, if I'm tired or whatever, this is one I'll go through. Track 3, side 1. And this is one that my wife will not give me. She'll be like, you know what, man, that doesn't stand the test of time. And she's being very diplomatic, but I can see in her face she doesn't like it. And I'm like, that song is great. You guys can
Turn the
vote on it.
volume up.
And I will
Smash or
respect
trash.
your
Yeah.
I will
Smash or
respect your
trash.
opinion if you're not with me on it, but that's what we love about the 60s is sometimes it can go underwater a little bit. It can be a little shaky.
Sure.
It might not be good, but they tried.
Well, and they were always searching for something new.
Yes. Yeah. I always say to her, what's wrong with saying outside my window is a tree? I mean, he's being observational.
Wasn't that Peter Brown doing the lyrics?
Yes.
Kind of a left of center out there poet type of guy, yeah. He wrote a lot of the lyrics for the Cream songs at this album, yeah.
I don't mind this one.
I think it's great.
The one I hate is the Ginger Baker tune on here that he sings. He's a terrible singer, and it's a bad song. It's just awful.
Come on,
that?
press rat and warthog.
I got the last word.
You got buzzed, right?
Exactly. You got buzzed.
That wasn't you getting the last word. You got.
Yeah.
You got
Shut down.
buzzkill.
But there's so much stuff that came out in the 60s and early 70s from there. I mean, we didn't even touch on Fairport Convention, Richard Thompson.
We didn't play any Who.
And no Who at all.
Joe
No,
Cocker.
no Yardbirds.
Yeah, Yardbirds.
Jet
No
Mail.
Hollies.
Jethro Tull.
I think what we're gonna try and do is have like a list of like stuff that we didn't get to play that people should listen to for when we air this. Then you can go back and do your own search and
You put that together, Noah.
do some deeper cuts.
Deeper
Well, I think it'd be
cuts.
cool if
I
we
think
all
it's a
did.
great
Once
idea.
again, you
Elton
guys,
John,
you guys
for
know
crying out
more than I do. I'm just here to.
Great music.
I don't know why I'm here. I'm just here.
Tumbleweed, man.
Wondering that all
I
night
just
long.
lent that record to Noah recently.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, how about we let the people with the cameras go and let's hang out for a little bit. We've got a ton of music to listen to, and until Steve takes us
They
out.
quit filming 20 minutes ago.
They're not even here anymore.
But yes, thank you BATV for.
Yes, thank you.
ATV.
And of course, Mr. D
Jake. Kibas. 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 About
You,
2
the
weeks.
audience. What look?
Yeah, the audience.
Audience.
The audience.
Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause.
Live studio audience.
Thank you once again, everybody, for being here tonight. We had a great time. We will see you next month at Divine Revolution. Peace.
Let's try to take 3.